Alva Vanderbilt stood at the edge of the ballroom in Marble House, its towering marble columns casting long shadows under the fading afternoon sun. A palace of ambition, built to humiliate rivals and crown her as the true queen of Newport society. Yet within its walls, her marriage to Willie K. Vanderbilt was already crumbling. The house that had promised to solidify her power became the very thing that tore her world apart. In the end, she would file for a divorce, sacrificing her social position and her marriage for the price of ambition. But what was the cost of this gilded dream? Alva Erskine Smith was not born into the world she would come to dominate. She arrived in 1853, the daughter of a cotton merchant whose fortunes rose and fell with the tides of commerce. Her childhood in Mobile, Alabama, taught her a single, brutal lesson. Money was power, and without it, you were invisible. When the Civil War devastated her family's wealth, young Alva watched her mother navigate reduced circumstances with grace and determination. But grace was not enough. Alva wanted more than survival. She wanted supremacy. By the time she reached New York in her 20s, Alva had transformed herself into something society had never quite seen before. She was beautiful, yes, but beauty was common among the ambitious daughters of fallen Southern families. What set Alva apart was her ruthlessness. She understood that in the Gilded Age, appearance was everything. Power belonged to those who could seize it and hold it against all challengers. Her marriage to William Kissam Vanderbilt in 1875 seemed like destiny. Willie K., as everyone called him, was the grandson of Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, the railroad magnate who had built one of America's greatest fortunes. The Vanderbilt name meant wealth beyond imagination, but it did not mean acceptance. Old New York society, guarded by the formidable Caroline Astor, viewed the Vanderbilts as nouveau, riche, crude, unworthy of entering the most exclusive drawing rooms. Alva saw this rejection as a declaration of war. She would not simply join high society, she would conquer it, remake it in her image, and she would do it with the one weapon the old guard could not ignore: spectacular, undeniable grandeur. Her first triumph came in 1883 with a costume ball at the Vanderbilt Mansion on Fifth Avenue. Alva understood theater. She understood that the old families could close their doors, but they could not resist spectacle. She engineered a social trap. Caroline Astor's daughter wanted desperately to attend, but Alva had not yet received the required formal call from Mrs. Astor herself. The message was clear. If you want access to my world, you must acknowledge me first. Mrs. Astor blinked. She made the call. The ball became legend. 1,200 guests in elaborate costumes. The house transformed into a Versailles fantasy. Alva wore a Venetian princess gown that cost thousands. The newspapers covered every detail. And when it was over, Alva Vanderbilt had achieved what no amount of Vanderbilt money had managed before. She had forced society to bend the knee. But victory was never enough for Alva. She had proven she could dominate New York. Now she set her eyes on Newport, Rhode Island, the summer playground where America's wealthiest families gathered to display their power. The families who had summered there for generations considered themselves royalty. Their cottages were palaces, each one trying to outshine the last. The Breakers, Rosecliff, Ochre Court, monuments to excess and competition. Alva wanted something different, something that would make every other mansion look small. She began planning Marble House in 1888. The idea consumed her. This would not be just another summer cottage. This would be a temple, a shrine to her own vision of what power should look like. She imagined walls of pure marble, rooms that echoed the grandest palaces of Europe, a scale that would make visitors feel diminished simply by entering. Willie Kay gave her the resources she needed. He was a man who loved yachts and horses, pleasures that required little emotional investment. Alva's ambitions were more complicated, more demanding, but he agreed to fund her vision. The house would be his birthday gift to her, a present that would cost $11 million, the equivalent of over $300 million today. The architect she chose was Richard Morris Hunt, the first American to study at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Hunt understood classical grandeur. He had designed the base of the Statue of Liberty and was already at work on the breakers for Alva's brother-in-law. When Alva came to him with her vision for Marble House, Hunt saw an opportunity to create something unprecedented on American soil. They planned a house inspired by the Petit Trianon at Versailles. But where the Petit Trianon was elegant restraint, Marble House would be overwhelming opulence. 500,000 cubic feet of marble, imported from the finest quarries, gold leaf covering entire rooms, furniture fit for kings, every detail specified, controlled, perfected. This would be Alva's masterpiece. What she did not see in those early planning sessions was the emotional cost already accumulating. Willie Kay was not a partner in this dream. He was a financier, nothing more. The house that should have been their shared legacy was becoming Alva's obsession alone. She spent hours with Hunt, discussing proportions and materials, debating which marble would best capture light, which gilding technique would create the most dramatic effect. Willie spent those same hours elsewhere, pursuing his own pleasures, growing distant. The marriage had never been a love match in the romantic sense. It was an alliance, a merger of ambition and wealth. But alliances require mutual benefit, shared purpose. As Alva poured herself into Marble House, she stopped asking what Willie wanted. She stopped noticing his absence. The house was becoming a substitute for everything else in her life, proof of her power, evidence of her taste, a monument that would outlast any relationship. In 1892, construction began on Bellevue Avenue in Newport. Alva stood on the plot of land and saw the future. She saw marble columns rising against the sky. She saw rooms filled with light and beauty. She saw herself finally as the undisputed queen of American society. What she could not see was that she was building her own gilded cage. But the workers who would bring her vision to life, they saw something else entirely. The marble came first. 500,000 cubic feet of it, quarried from deposits across the world and shipped to Newport by rail and sea. Italian Cipollino for the columns, pink Numidian from Africa for the walls, yellow sienna for accents. Each piece cut to precise specifications, each surface polished until it gleamed. The logistics were staggering. The cost was astronomical. Alva did not care about cost. She cared about perfection, and perfection required an army of craftsmen working around the clock to transform raw stone into architectural poetry. The construction site became a small city unto itself, crowded with Italian stoneworkers, French bronze artisans, German gilders, American carpenters. Each trade brought its own skills, its own traditions, its own language. The work was punishing. Marble is beautiful but brutal to work with. It fractures unexpectedly. It weighs more than granite. Moving the massive blocks required teams of men and horses, elaborate pulley systems, and constant vigilance. One mistake could destroy months of labor. One crack could mean starting over. The men worked in all weather, their hands bleeding, their backs aching, driven by foremen who answered to Hunt, who answered to Alva. She visited the site constantly, not to check on the workers' welfare, but to ensure her vision was being executed exactly as she imagined. She walked through the rising structure, her skirts collecting dust, her eyes scanning every surface for imperfection. She demanded changes. A column moved 3 inches, a doorway widened, a ceiling raised. Each change meant more labor, more cost, more time. Hunt tried to moderate her demands. But Alva was not interested in moderation. She had studied the great houses of Europe during her travels. She had stood in Versailles and felt the weight of absolute monarchy made manifest in architecture. That was what she wanted, not a house, but a statement. Not comfort, but awe. The gold room became her obsession within an obsession. Hunt had designed it as a ballroom, but Alva wanted something beyond mere dancing space. She wanted a room that would make guests gasp. The walls would be covered in gold leaf. The ceiling would feature elaborate Rococo moldings. The furniture would include pieces once owned by French royalty. The cost of this single room approached the total budget of most Newport cottages. Willie Kay watched the bills accumulate. $11 million was a fortune, even for a Vanderbilt. He had agreed to fund the house, but he had not anticipated Alva's relentless drive for perfection. Every meeting with Hunt brought new expenses. Every shipment from Europe added to the total. And through it all, Alva remained unmoved by concerns about money. This was her vision. It would be realized completely or not at all. The distance between them grew with each passing month. Willie Kay had his yacht, the Alva, one of the most luxurious vessels ever built. He spent increasing amounts of time at sea, away from Newport, away from the construction chaos, away from his wife. When he was in residence, they inhabited separate worlds. Alva lived in the house, taking shape on Bellevue Avenue. Willie lived in memories of simpler pleasures, times before every conversation revolved around marble and molding. Alva barely noticed his absence. She was too consumed with details. The entrance hall required 14 different types of marble. The library needed hand-carved walnut paneling. The Gothic room demanded medieval tapestries and furniture worthy of a European castle. Each room was a kingdom unto itself, each one requiring Alva's complete attention. The servants who would eventually maintain this palace numbered over 20. But during construction, the workforce was 10 times that size. Men ate, slept, and worked on the grounds. The noise was constant. The dust was everywhere. Accidents happened. A worker fell from scaffolding and broke his leg. Another lost 2 fingers to a cutting saw. These were not tragedies to Alva. They were delays, inconveniences that might push back her timeline. Hunt grew exhausted trying to satisfy her demands while maintaining structural integrity. He was one of the greatest architects of his generation, but he had never encountered a client quite like Alva Vanderbilt. She did not simply want his expertise. She wanted her fantasy made real, regardless of practical limitations. When he suggested compromises, she rejected them. When he explained why certain designs were impossible, she told him to find a way. The house became a test of wills, and Alva always won. By 1893, the exterior was largely complete. The white marble facade gleamed in the sun, visible from the street, from neighboring properties, from the ocean. It looked like a temple transplanted from ancient Greece, but covered in so much ornate detail that classical purity gave way to Gilded Age excess. The other Newport cottages suddenly seemed understated by comparison. But the interior was where Alva's true vision lived. The entrance hall featured walls of yellow sienna marble. The staircase was bronze, cast in France and shipped in pieces. The dining room had pink Numidian marble walls and Corinthian columns. Every room flowed into the next, each one more elaborate than the last, each one designed to overwhelm. The cost of furnishing the house nearly matched the cost of building it. Alva traveled to Europe, buying furniture from palaces, commissioning new pieces from the finest craftsmen. She purchased chairs that had belonged to Louis XIV. She acquired tapestries from medieval castles. She had bronze fixtures cast to her exact specifications. Every object was chosen to reinforce a single message. This house represented power beyond questioning. Willie Kay understood the message, but he also understood that his wife had become someone he no longer recognized. The ambitious woman he had married had transformed into a force of nature, unstoppable and unconcerned with anything beyond her vision. Their conversations, when they happened, were transactional. Alva needed something approved. Willie signed the papers. They shared a house, but not a life. The servants whispered about the tension. In the Gilded Age, servants saw everything. They knew which couples slept in separate bedrooms, which marriages were alliances rather than love stories, which families presented unity in public while fracturing in private. The Vanderbilt servants watched their mistress obsess over curtain fabric, while her husband found reasons to be anywhere else. Alva told herself the marriage was fine. Willie was simply not interested in architecture and design. He had his pursuits, she had hers. This was normal for people of their class. Romance was for novels. Real marriage was about partnership, about shared social position, about maintaining the family name. The fact that they barely spoke was irrelevant. But late at night, walking through the unfinished rooms of Marble House, Alva sometimes felt the weight of her isolation. She had built this palace to prove her power, to show society that a woman could create something magnificent, to establish herself as the unquestioned leader of Newport's social world. But there was no one to share the achievement with. Willie did not care about the marble or the gold. He paid for it, but he did not celebrate it. The house was hers alone. In August of 1892, just as construction was reaching its peak intensity, something happened that would change everything. Willie Kay met someone else, a woman named Virginia Graham Fair, young and beautiful and utterly uncomplicated. She did not care about marble. She did not obsess over architectural details. She simply enjoyed Willie's company, laughed at his jokes, made him feel like something other than a walking checkbook. Alva did not know about Virginia yet, but she felt the shift in Willie's energy. He was gone more often, less engaged when present. Their formal dinners became exercises in polite silence. She told herself it did not matter. The house was almost finished. Once it was complete, once she could host her first ball in the gold room, everything would be right again. She was wrong. Marble House opened in the summer of 1892 to immediate acclaim. Newspapers called it the finest house in America. Society figures fought for invitations to tour its rooms. The gold room became legendary before a single ball was held there. Alva had achieved exactly what she set out to do. She had built a monument to her own vision that no one could ignore or dismiss. But Willie Kay was not there to celebrate. He was at sea, on the Alva, sailing away from Newport and everything it represented. And in the marble halls of her palace, surrounded by gold and beauty and triumph, Alva Vanderbilt felt the first cold touch of a truth she had been avoiding. She had won society, but lost her marriage. The crisis was coming. The summer of 1893 should have been Alva's greatest triumph. Marble House was complete. Every room perfected, every surface polished, every detail exactly as she had envisioned. The house sparkled in the summer sun, its white marble facade glowing like a jewel against the green. Lawns and blue ocean. Visitors gasped when they entered. Society columnists wrote breathless descriptions of the gold room. Alva had done it. She had built the most magnificent cottage in Newport. But Willie K. barely lived there. He came to required social events. He played the role of host when necessary. But his heart was elsewhere, and soon everyone knew where. The affair with Virginia Graham Fair had become an open secret. In the cruel mathematics of Gilded Age society, such things could be tolerated if handled discreetly. Men of Willie's class often had mistresses. Wives looked the other way. Marriages continued as social partnerships while emotional needs were met elsewhere. Alva was not a woman who looked the other way. She had spent her entire adult life fighting for respect, for position, for recognition. She had forced Caroline Astor to acknowledge her. She had conquered Newport society. She had built a palace that made everyone else's achievements look small. And now her husband was humiliating her, making her look like a fool, undermining everything she had worked to establish. The confrontation, when it came, was savage. Alva demanded Willie end the affair. Willie, exhausted from years of funding Alva's obsessions while receiving nothing in return, refused. He was tired of being an accessory to her ambitions, tired of playing the supporting role in her drama. He wanted something for himself, even if it meant scandal. Alva saw his refusal as the ultimate betrayal, not because she loved him in any romantic sense. Their marriage had never been about romance, but he had broken their implicit agreement. She gave him social prestige, architectural glory, a wife who made him relevant beyond just his money. He was supposed to give her security, support, the resources to build her empire. By choosing Virginia Fair, he was choosing to embarrass Alva, to reduce her to the cliché of the scorned wife. She would not accept that role. In March of 1894, Alva did something almost unprecedented in high society. She filed for divorce, not a quiet separation, not a discreet arrangement, a full, public, scandalous divorce that would be covered by every newspaper in America. The scandal exploded across the nation. Vanderbilt heiress seeks divorce. The headlines screamed it. The details were lurid, carefully selected by Alva's lawyers to paint Willie as an adulterer and abandoner. She claimed desertion. She claimed infidelity. She demanded and received $12 million in the settlement, plus the deed to Marble House. Newport society was stunned. Women of Alva's class did not divorce. They endured. They maintained appearances. They suffered in dignified silence rather than create public spectacle. But Alva had never played by those rules. She had built her entire career on breaking social conventions, on forcing society to accept her on her terms. Why should marriage be any different? The cost was immediate and brutal. Divorced women in 1894 occupied a strange liminal space. They were no longer respectable wives. They could not be accepted in the same way. Invitations that once came automatically now arrived less frequently, or not at all. Women who had competed for Alva's attention now whispered about her behind gloved hands. She had won her freedom and her fortune, but she had sacrificed the social position she had spent 2 decades building. Marble House, meanwhile, stood as a monument to everything she had lost. Every room represented a moment of her marriage falling apart. The gold room, where she had imagined triumphant balls, now felt empty. The Gothic room, where Willie had occasionally read, felt like a mausoleum. The bedrooms they had occupied separately were reminders of intimacy that had never really existed. The house was perfect, but it was poisoned by memory. Alva's daughter, Consuelo, watched her mother unravel and rebuild herself simultaneously. Consuelo was 18, beautiful, the product of Alva's ambitions as much as Marble House was. And Alva, wounded by her own marital failure, became obsessed with securing a different kind of triumph through her daughter. If Alva could not have a perfect marriage herself, she would engineer one for Consuelo. A marriage so spectacular it would redeem everything. She set her sights on European aristocracy, specifically on Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough. One of England's premier noblemen. He needed money. His family estate, Blenheim Palace, required massive funds to maintain. Consuelo had money, vast amounts of it from the Vanderbilt fortune. Alva saw the match as perfect. Her daughter would become a duchess. American money would merge with British title, and Alva would be the architect of both. Consuelo did not want to marry the Duke. She was in love with someone else, a young man named Winthrop Rutherford. But Alva did not care about her daughter's feelings any more than she had cared about Willie's happiness. This marriage would happen. It had to happen. It was the only way to salvage something from the ruins of Alva's own failed marriage. The pressure Alva applied was relentless. She threatened to cut Consuelo off financially. She claimed heart problems that would worsen if Consuelo disobeyed. She wept, she raged, she manipulated. And in November of 1895, Consuelo married the Duke of Marlborough in a ceremony that cost the modern equivalent of $10 million. Alva had won again, but the victory was hollow. Consuelo's marriage was as loveless as Alva's had been. The Duke wanted her money, not her. Consuelo endured the same emotional isolation Alva had experienced, living in a palace that represented duty rather than joy. Mother and daughter had both sacrificed happiness for position, both chosen ambition over love. Alva stood in Marble House after the wedding and felt the full weight of her choices. She had built this palace to prove her power. She had sacrificed her marriage rather than accept humiliation. She had forced her daughter into a loveless union to maintain social prestige. And for what? The marble walls around her were beautiful, but cold. The gold gleamed, but provided no warmth. She had won every battle, but the war had left her alone. The suffrage movement gave her purpose when everything else felt empty. Alva had always believed women deserved power. Now, divorced and ostracized by some corners of society, she channeled her energy into the fight for women's right to vote. She became one of the movement's most prominent financiers and advocates. She used Marble House to host suffrage meetings, transforming the Gold Room into a headquarters for political organizing. It was a strange redemption. The house built to intimidate society rivals became a gathering place for women fighting to change society itself. Alva, who had spent years proving she could compete in a man's world of wealth and display, now fought to give all women access to political power. The obsession that had destroyed her marriage evolved into something larger, something that might actually matter beyond Newport's narrow social circles. But the personal cost remained. Willie Kay married Virginia Fair shortly after the divorce was finalized. They were reportedly happy together, their relationship uncomplicated by the ambitions that had poisoned his marriage to Alva. He rarely visited Newport after that. Marble House belonged to Alva alone, a palace with a single inhabitant. The house had demanded everything: her time, her attention, her marriage, her daughter's happiness. And it had given back beauty, yes, and social triumph, yes, but not fulfillment, not peace, not the satisfaction of shared achievement. Alva had built her monument, but she lived in it alone, surrounded by marble that reflected light but absorbed no warmth. Was it worth it? That question haunted her. Alva Vanderbilt lived another 38 years after her divorce. She remarried in 1900, choosing Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, another wealthy heir who shared her passion for architecture and social reform. When he died in 1908, she inherited another fortune and another grand estate. But Marble House remained her primary residence, the place she returned to, the monument that defined her. She transformed herself into one of America's most prominent suffragists. Her money-funded rallies, organized campaigns, and supported activists across the country. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, hosted fundraisers. The woman who had once obsessed over marble and gold now obsessed over political strategy and legislative victory. When the 19th Amendment passed in 1920, granting women the right to vote, Alva felt a satisfaction that had eluded her in all her social triumphs. This achievement was different. Building Marble House had been about proving herself to society. Fighting for suffrage was about changing society itself. The shift was profound. She had stopped trying to dominate an existing system and started trying to dismantle and rebuild it. The ambition remained, but the target had changed. Yet Marble House stood as a constant reminder of who she had been. She never substantially altered its design. The gold room remained exactly as it had been in 1892. The marble halls echoed with memories of balls and confrontations, triumphs and failures. Tourists began visiting Newport's great cottages, and Alva allowed some limited access to Marble House. She understood its historical significance, even as it represented her personal tragedy. Her relationship with Consuelo remained complicated. The daughter eventually divorced the Duke of Marlborough in 1921 after enduring 26 years of unhappy marriage. Mother and daughter had both sacrificed love for position. Both had married men who valued their money more than themselves. Both had eventually chosen divorce over continued misery. The parallel was too obvious to ignore. Did Alva feel guilt over forcing the marriage? If she did, she never admitted it publicly. She maintained that she had given Consuelo opportunities, position, a title. That the marriage had served its purpose even if it had not brought happiness. But privately, in letters to friends, hints of regret emerged. Wishes that things could have been different. Acknowledgement that perhaps her own ambitions had cost her daughter the very thing Alva herself had craved, the freedom to choose. Marble House outlived its creator's intentions. It had been built as a summer cottage, a place to host parties for 3 months each year. But it became a museum of Gilded Age excess, a teaching tool about wealth and power and the costs of both. The Preservation Society of Newport County eventually acquired it, opening it to the public. Millions have walked through its rooms, marveling at the gold and marble, unable to imagine the emotional price paid within those walls. The house succeeded in its original purpose. It made Alva unforgettable. A century after her death, people still talk about Marble House, still visit it, still wonder at its opulence. The Vanderbilt name endures largely because of places like this. The architectural achievement is undeniable. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. As a monument to ambition, it is perfect. But as a home, it was a failure. No warmth lived in those marble halls. No love softened the hard surfaces. The house demanded everything and gave back only the cold satisfaction of victory. Alva won her battles against society, but she lost the war against loneliness. Her final years were spent in Newport and New York, increasingly frail, increasingly isolated. The society she had conquered moved on. New generations with new fortunes built new monuments. The Gilded Age ended. The income tax arrived. The First World War changed everything. The extravagant world that had seemed eternal proved as fragile as any other. Alva died in 1933 at the age of 80. She left a complex legacy: champion of women's rights, builder of architectural masterpieces, social revolutionary who forced society to accept her. But also absent mother, manipulative parent, woman who sacrificed love for ambition at every turn. Marble House remains her truest monument. Not because it is beautiful, though it is. Not because it represents architectural genius, though it does. But because it embodies the central tragedy of Alva's life. She built it to prove her power, and in doing so, she imprisoned herself within it. The palace became a cage. The triumph became a trap. What can we learn from Alva Vanderbilt's story? That ambition without balance destroys as much as it creates. That victory over others means nothing if it costs you connection with those you love. That monuments last longer than marriages, but provide far less comfort. That power and respect are not the same as happiness. Alva achieved everything she set out to do. She conquered society. She built magnificent houses. She changed laws. She left a mark on history that will never be erased. But she did it alone, surrounded by marble and gold, sustained by triumph rather than love. Standing in the gold room today, you can feel the weight of her achievement. The room is breathtaking, overwhelming, a masterpiece of design and craft. But it is also profoundly sad. This room, like the woman who created it, demanded perfection and rejected compromise. It got what it wanted, but what it wanted was never enough. Marble House teaches us that some prices are too high, even for beauty, that some victories cost more than they are worth, that the monuments we build to ourselves can become the walls that isolate us. Alva Vanderbilt wanted to be remembered. She succeeded, but the memory is bittersweet, a reminder that ambition, unchecked and unbalanced, devours everything it touches. The palace still stands on Bellevue Avenue, gleaming in the sun. Tourists photograph its facade, marvel at its interiors, imagine what it must have been like to live in such splendor. But they cannot imagine the silence, the emptiness, the cold marble reflecting back only your own ambition. They cannot feel what Alva felt, standing alone in her triumph, wondering if it was worth the cost. That is her legacy, not the marble or the gold, not the social victories or the political achievements, but the question that haunts every visitor: what would you sacrifice for your dreams? And when you achieve them, will you be standing alone in an empty palace, wondering why victory feels so much like loss? The great estates of America's Gilded Age each tell a story about power, wealth, and the human cost of both. Marble House stands as one of the most magnificent and one of the most tragic. Alva Vanderbilt's ambition gave us architectural beauty that endures. But it also reminds us that monuments outlast the emotions that created them, and that winning everything can mean losing what matters most. What other estates should we explore? Which stories of ambition and sacrifice deserve to be told? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the palaces and people who shaped American history. And if you found yourself moved by Alva's story, hit that like button. These tales of triumph and tragedy deserve to be remembered, learned from, and shared.